A World Cup shuttle bus on fire, in the middle of Times Square, while a World Cup match was still being discussed on television screens inside the bars surrounding it. That actually happened on June 14, 2026, in the city hosting the World Cup final. And somehow, that wasn't even close to being the only thing FIFA had to deal with that week. This is the 2026 FIFA World Cup, the biggest, most expensive, most ambitious football tournament ever staged. And right now, 2 weeks in, it is producing the kind of off-pitch headlines that FIFA's entire communications department could not have prepared for. Not because the football isn't happening. It is. The goals are coming, the drama is building, and the group stage is delivering moments that will be talked about for decades. But underneath all of that, something else entirely is unfolding, and it's bigger, messier, and more chaotic than anyone in football governance wanted to admit was possible. So what's really happening here? Let's start in New York on the night of June 13th, because what happened there is one of the strangest and most chaotic scenes ever associated with a World Cup. The city was hosting one of the tournament's highest-profile group stage matches, Brazil against Morocco, at the stadium across the river in New Jersey. Thousands of fans made the journey, watched a tense goalless draw, and then boarded the shuttle buses the city had specifically arranged to transport them back into Manhattan. What they arrived back to was chaos. On the same night, the local basketball team won their first championship in 53 years. The city erupted. Hundreds of thousands of people poured into the streets of Midtown Manhattan, and a convoy of about 15 World Cup transport vehicles, the same yellow school buses the city government had hired specifically to ferry football fans to and from the stadium, drove straight into the middle of it. What happened next was filmed from dozens of angles and spread across the internet within minutes. Celebrating fans swarmed the convoy. They climbed onto the roofs of buses. They got inside and sat in the driving seats. 5 of the buses were destroyed. 9 were abandoned. 1 was set on fire. A teenager was shot in Times Square. Officers in riot gear eventually moved in on horseback to clear the streets. Brazilian football supporters in the city to watch their national team play at the World Cup ended up on the roof of a burning shuttle bus waving their national flag, not because of football, but because an American city simultaneously hosted 2 historic sporting events on the same night, with no coordination between them. FIFA had been informed in advance that the NBA Finals were scheduled to potentially overlap with World Cup matches in New York. The scheduling conflict was known. The potential for exactly this kind of chaos existed on paper before a single ticket was sold. And yet, on the night it happened, there was no plan that prevented 15 World Cup transport vehicles from driving into one of the largest spontaneous street celebrations the city had seen in half a century. Here's where things get interesting. Transport was already one of the most criticized aspects of this tournament before the buses burned. An urban planning analyst ranked all 16 World Cup venues on their public transit access and proximity to city centers. New Jersey, home to the stadium that will host the final on July 19th, was rated the worst of all 16 venues. Fans attending the final of the biggest World Cup in football history will be traveling to a stadium that its own host city's infrastructure experts consider the least accessible of any venue at the tournament. Multiple American venues lack public rail access entirely, relying instead on car-dependent infrastructure that civil engineering bodies have rated as deficient. Reports emerged of fans considering walking to the New Jersey stadium along the shoulder of a motorway. Local officials told people not to do it, not because it was impossible, but because it endangered motorists and police officers. The pedestrian crossings near the stadium had been closed for the event. The fan experience of getting to a World Cup match in the richest country on Earth at the most expensive World Cup in history involved navigating burnt shuttle buses, motorway shoulders, and transport systems rated at the bottom of every independent assessment. But that's only part of the story. The transport chaos sits alongside a ticketing situation that has now attracted legal attention from multiple state governments. FIFA introduced dynamic pricing for this tournament, a mechanism that raised ticket costs automatically as demand increased. Tickets to the final were listed at prices that went through 3 separate increases,
rising from an already steep starting point to figures that put attendance out of reach for the vast majority of football fans anywhere on the planet.
The cheapest available option on FIFA's own resale marketplace for the final was sitting at nearly $10,000. A front category premium seat was listed at over $30,000. On unofficial secondary markets, individual tickets appeared at figures exceeding $2 million. FIFA's president publicly defended all of it, arguing the prices reflected market conditions and comparing them to American sports playoffs. What he didn't address was the specific accusation that had generated formal investigations. Tens of thousands of tickets appeared to vanish from FIFA's primary sales platform and then reappear on its own resale marketplace at different prices, with FIFA taking a 15% commission from both the buyer and the seller on every transaction. Several state attorneys general issued subpoenas and launched formal probes. One described the process fans had to go through as a gauntlet of confusion and fake scarcity. Another said no one should be manipulated into paying sky-high prices for seats. FIFA welcomed every investigation and said it was very relaxed. The buses were still burning. Now, this is where things change, because the transport and ticketing disasters are, in a strange way, the most visible problems at this tournament, the ones you can film, the ones that spread on social media instantly. But there are other issues running underneath them that tell a more complicated story about what FIFA actually built here. The fan festival situation is one that hasn't received the attention it deserves. For every World Cup since the concept was introduced, official fan zones, large free public viewing areas in the host cities, have been a central part of the tournament experience, a place where fans without tickets could gather, watch matches on giant screens, and feel part of something bigger than a stadium. At this World Cup, several of the biggest American host cities canceled or significantly scaled back their fan festivals entirely. New York, the San Francisco Bay Area, and Seattle all either canceled their large central fan festivals or reduced them to smaller community events. The reason in each case was the same: cost. The venues where the festivals would have been held, in cities with some of the highest real estate and operational costs in the world, made organizing free public viewing at the scale previous World Cups offered simply financially unworkable for the local authorities involved. So, in the host cities of the biggest World Cup ever staged, fans without tickets found fewer official places to gather and watch together than they would have at smaller tournaments held in less expensive parts of the world. The expansion of the tournament to 48 teams and the relocation to North America's most expensive cities created a dynamic where the public, community experience of a World Cup actually shrank compared to what fans in Brazil, South Africa, and Germany had access to in previous years. Think about what that means in practice. A fan who travels from another country to New York, can't afford a ticket, and wants to watch their team play in a World Cup setting is left to find a bar or stay in their hotel room. There is no official fan zone waiting for them. There is no giant screen in a public square with thousands of other supporters gathered around it. The community heartbeat of the tournament, the part that exists for everyone regardless of income, quietly disappeared in some of the cities that most needed it. And then there is the referee situation, which deserves its own moment because of what it represents beyond the individual story. A Somali referee had qualified to officiate at this World Cup, becoming the first person from his country ever selected for football's biggest stage. He arrived in the United States to do his job and was denied entry at the airport. He never officiated a single match. The referee, who had worked through years of African football to reach this point, was turned away at the border of the country hosting the tournament. FIFA's president, when asked about situations like this one, repeatedly said that FIFA cannot control government immigration policies. That is technically true. FIFA is not a government. It cannot issue visas or override border decisions. But FIFA spent years choosing this host, negotiating the hosting agreement, and building the commercial structure of a tournament projected to generate over $13 billion in revenue.
The ability to negotiate entry guarantees for match officials was presumably part of those conversations, and a Somali referee denied entry suggests that whatever guarantees were obtained, they didn't cover the people they needed to cover most. An Iraqi striker was detained for 7 hours at an airport upon arrival. Team officials from several nations were turned away. A Somali referee never made it in, and FIFA's response to each situation was the same: we cannot control government immigration policies. Where does all of this leave things heading into the knockout rounds? The football itself is genuinely delivering. The group stage has produced upsets, historic moments, and performances that will be remembered for years. The expanded format, for all its critics, has given nations their first World Cup experiences that generated stories with real emotional weight. The sport on the pitch has been as good as it ever has been at this stage of a tournament, but the infrastructure around it has failed in ways that are specific, documented, and in several cases entirely predictable. The transport systems were rated inadequate before the tournament began. The ticketing system attracted legal investigations before the group stage was done. The fan festivals disappeared from the cities that most needed them. A referee was denied entry to the country hosting the tournament. These aren't rumors. They're not opposition talking points. They're things that happened on camera in real time during the biggest football event in history.